And we're back live. Back at it. I was earlier debating if we could continue from 72, but just skip to some sociology because I'm more struggling with sociology. But I think I'm going to keep with starting at 72 for now. Matters on the time constraint that I have because I just want to read everything at least once in this document. And then after, um, go through go through the highlighted stuff that I'm not as familiar with. So, let's start with cognition. Piaget's stage of cognitive development. So, Piaget argued children weren't miniature adults, but they believe that they construct their own understanding of the world as they grow. As their bodies grow, their mind grows as well. So, Piaget has many stages that we need to worry about. So, Piaget's first stage is known as the sensory motor stage, which is 0 to 2 years old. If from all my big practice tests, this is a high yield question area that they could question you on the different development stages of cognition. So, in the sensory motor stage, this is where the senses begin to develop in the 0 to 2 year old to gather information about the world: sight, smell, taste, hearing, touch. And the motor part is actively trying to develop these senses by moving their body and learning. The main task for this, the main task to be like the milestone to progress to the next stage is object permanence, which is the belief that objects exist even if you can't see them. So, for example, like an infant, when you play peekaboo, they think it's the first time they're ever seeing you every time that you play peekaboo because they haven't developed object permanence yet. And it also includes stranger anxiety. So, an acronym to remember stage 1 of Piaget's is 1 is a bun. So, and sensory motor uses the motor part of the sensory motor in picture for cinnamon buns in place of wheels. Okay. I just have it brute memorized because I took child psychology, but interesting way. And then stage 2 is 2 to 6 to 7 year olds, and it's considered the pre-operational stage. And they have the ability to pretend and have an imagination for creativity. Many children during this stage do pretend play by using different symbols in their culture that they have developed. And symbols will be talked about later in the sociology section of this document. And symbols tend to be like any material, physical, or cognitive representation of something in culture. That's my definition that I have off the top of my head. Egocentric is that they are basically only concerned about themselves and they have no empathy. So they don't understand how to look at someone else's point of view. That's why these children aren't selfish, but egocentric because they can't relate to other people. And then here's another acronym. If you want to read it, you can. I just know the stage already. But it says 2 is shoe. 1 is bun, 2 is shoe. And pre-operational uses preacher. And imagine him wearing outrageous, ugly, or funny shoes. Interesting. Stage 7 to 11 is the concrete operational. And operational equals mental operations. Learn idea conservation. So for conservation, it's a test when they have two identical glasses, but they're different shapes. And then they can tell you if they have the same amount of water or not. And they began to develop empathy and math skills during this phase. That's the main takeaways. The concrete describes children who are able to grasp concrete real life events and refers to the ability to recognize the number of events that can be changed. Okay. And here's another acronym for concrete operation. Picture a tree with concrete leaves, and the tree is growing out of a concrete pot. Next to the tree is a pile of logs for logical thinking. Next to the wooden comedy for accommodation. Okay. Stage 4 is the formal operational stage. This is where they can abstract think and have moral reasoning. At this point, children are reasoning more like adults, and they continue to develop this over time. In the formal operational stage, children will be able to think logically about abstract ideas, hypothetical situations, and use abstract thinking to solve novel problems. And then the acronym is 4 is door. In formal operation, pictures a very wide door. Behind the door are 4 males with excellent abs. For abstract thinking, what is the at this stage? So, stage 1 is sensory motor, and that's when they're developing their senses and developing their motor skills by able to move their body. Step 2 is the pre-concrete stage. Oh, also for sensory and motor, they have not developed object permanence yet. And then the pre-operational stage has they have not developed empathy because they're only egocentric at this moment in period of development. And this one focus on what is the main focus? Pretend play. So imagination. Concrete is about conservation and logical mathematical thinking, and then stage 4 informal is logical abstract thinking. Okay. Moving on. Schemas, assimilation, and accommodation. Piaget's, all of us include young children are trying to understand and make sense of the world around us using schemas. So a schema is a framework for us framework for us to organize and interpret new information. Piaget's belief of cognitive development was in the development of schemas. To develop these, you need to be able to grow/change them. What happens through assimilations and accommodations? So, assimilation is when we add new information to our current understanding/schemas. So, acronym, remember this is assimilation has SS, so same schema. Accommodation, how we later adjust our schemas and incorporate new experience to remember. So accommodation has CC, so change or create. Okay. Example given in video. Imagine a box with 3 holes that fit 3 different shapes. Circle, triangle, and square. They all fit perfectly, but what if we have a star? We can either make another star-shaped hole in our box with a star to fit it to simulate it, or we can accommodate by making a new schema for it. Okay. Development moves along in a state of equilibrium as we assimilate or accommodate new information we come across. Most information we encounter, we can assimilate and be back in a state of equilibrium. Okay. So information assimilation equilibrium. Sometimes assimilation can cause us to come into equilibrium. We can engage in accommodation. So information accommodation equilibrium. To reach equilibrium again, you gain a new schema. So the simulation is SS, so it's going to be the same schema. Accommodation is change. Problem solving. So example of problems. How do you decide who to marry? Best route to your new job. How to satisfy your growling stomach. Problem solving. Moving from a current state to a goal state. This is called solving a problem. Can be something as simple as starting a YouTube video. We are excellent problem solvers. They can be broken down into different categories. Well-defined and ill-defined. So well-defined problems are clearly stated, clearly starting and ending points. Okay. A well-defined problem has a clear criteria that describes whether or not the goal has been reached. Example, how to turn light that is currently dark. Ill-defined is more ambiguous, starting and ending points. An ill-defined problem does not have a obviously stated goal or lacks relevant information to solve the problem. Like how to live a happy life can still solve ill-defined problems but don't know outcome. Okay. There's methods of problem solving. Trial and error is when you take random guesses till something finally works out. It's not efficient. Like trying to remember a password for email you have accessed in a while. No password's 8 characters but don't remember what it is. If you're trying trial error, you guess a random combination. You don't even get to track how many you had guessed. You can get lucky and hit the password early, or it could take a long time. Algorithm is methodical approaches. So think like a Rubik's Cube. You can have algorithms to solve each different side. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that allow us to find a solution quicker than other two. So as a rule of thumb, that's what other people call it. It reduces the number of solutions we need to try by taking an approach as to what possibly could exist and eliminate trying unlikely possibilities. Doesn't guarantee a correct answer because there is several biases with heuristics, but like representative bias and representative heuristic bias, availability heuristic bias, those are just two examples. Mean end analysis. It's a heuristic where we analyze a main town and break it into smaller problems. We then attack the goal that has bigger difference between the current state and goal state. So that's what I'm doing right now, mean end analysis. I'm trying to get better at psychology and sociology, so I'm reading this 300-page document, and I'm slowly breaking it down in like 50-page increments, so that I'm not draining and dying. Working backwards, you start with a goal state, and then you work from the goal state to a current state, trying to figure out a certain route. Okay? Intuition relies on instinct, has high chance of error. Fixation, getting stuck on a wrong approach to a problem. If you start solving the problem, it typically occurs through an insight, that aha moment. Insight is hard to predict. Okay? It's hard to predict and hard to encourage, particularly when you are fixated on seeing a problem from the same inefficient approach. Or it can let problems incubate. Insight comes after some time. So I would think about incubating, like you're incubating an egg, and you're wondering why doesn't the chicken grow faster? And you realize that the incubation light is not up high enough to increase the growth and the division of cells. So you have to increase it up after a while. So that's just a tip how I remember incubate. Then there's type 1 error and type 2 error. Type 1 error is a false positive, and type 2 error is a false negative. Okay? I need to review those. So let's find a way to remember these easier without just brute memorizing it. So, type 1 error. So if you ever make a type 1 error, you're going to become false positive. Type 2 error equals false negative. So type 2 error makes me think of T and N. So 2 and T and N, so like tonight. So type 2 error equals negative because T and N equals night. Type 1 error is positive because O and P is overpowered. So type 1 error is a false positive. So continue. Decision making. We make a judgment or a desirable probability of a certain outcome. You use heuristics as the rule of thumb that we talked about earlier. Lots of kinds of heuristics for decision making. Availability heuristic. So that I was talking about earlier. That could also be a bias. Use examples that come to mind. Helpful but are easy memory experience that doesn't match the real state of the world. Example. Availability heuristic is a decision making heuristic where choices are based on quick, easily accessible examples. Example, more shark attacks on news, so you think a shark attack equals more fatal. But firework accidents are more fatal, but are less available to the public knowledge. So availability it alters your state of mind based on the availability of information given to you. Representative heuristic is that we think there's more of a certain population of people than usually there isn't. So a heuristic is where people look for the most representative answer. It looks to match a prototype to a given concept. For example, Linda is outspoken, very bright, major in philosophy as a student. She participated in anti-nuclear demonstration organizations that fought discrimination. What is more likely, Linda being a feminist bank teller or a bank teller? Most people will say feminist bank teller because of her previous information written, but it's actually she's just be more likely to be a bank teller because it's more likely with one roll of a dice than two. Okay, conjunction fallacy. So, conjunction fallacy is the co-occurrence of two instances that are more likely than a single one. People tend to think that the probability of two events occurring together is higher than the probability of one alone. So that's what I was talking about earlier, that Linda being a bank teller is greater than just being a bank. However, statistically speaking, there are more bank tellers than feminist bank tellers, so it's more likely she's just a bank teller. Got you. So, when a decision probability is judged based on how similar representatives to a specific group reflects features of the population as a whole and described as a representative heuristic. So, availability versus representative heuristic. Availability equals actual memory in mind. Representativeness, if I know how to speak today, it's not thinking about exact memories, but thinking of a prototype of an idea. Ah, okay. Okay. Biases. Biases that prevent us from making difficult decisions Oh, sorry, don't know how to read today. Biases that prevent us from making correct decisions or from changing decisions once they are made. There's overconfidence bias, which is going into a test without knowing a lot of information. Could be due to fluency, ease of processing during studying. Can happen in a test if you never tested yourself to see if you really knew the answers. Can overestimate the ability to produce answers when you need to. So we're trying to prevent overconfidence bias that you think that you know all the content for an exam. Belief perseverance is ignored slash rational discomforting facts during election learning about the ignored facts about someone you like. Confirmation bias is actively seeking out only confirming facts, only read stories about how wonderful candidates were. Okay. Framing effects. How you present how you present the decision can affect decisions as well. Such as disease will kill 600 people. Option A is a 100% chance. Exactly 200 people saved. Option B is 30% chance and 600. Option B, 30% chance that all 600 saved and 2/3 chance will be saved. Which option do you pick? Or 100% 400 die or 1/3 chance that no one dies? First exam, most people will pick A. In the second, most people will pick B. If the choice is framed based on how people will be saved, you're more likely to pick it. Based on morality. These factors that impact decisions are heuristic bias and framing show us that our decisions are not black and white or consistent as we think about them. Makes sense. So, somatic networks and spreading activation. So, this is related to memory or how we use our memory through retrieval. So, to solve problems, you have to access info already in our brain, so retrieval basically. Somatic networks are concepts organized in the mind in terms of connected ideas, parallel to how info might be stored in a computer. Links can be shorter for closely related ideas or longer for less related ideas. Concepts are represented by nodes. First somatic network was hierarchical, which is things are grouped from higher to lower. More specific characteristics are like things, long legs, stored at lower nodes, can breathe at higher nodes. Longer takes us to verify connection between nodes, longer takes us to make a link. So it's not true for all animal categories. People verify pig is an animal take longer than pig is a mammal. Therefore, proposed modified semantic network. Rather than hierarchical says every individual semantic develops based on experience and knowledge. So I like the modified more because it makes sense of like why everybody has different linkage of different experiences. It means all the ideas in the head are connected together. When you activate one concept, you pull it to related concept with another called spread activation, which we talked about, I believe, 2 days ago for that fire truck example. Unless I'm misremembering. Which is possible. Intelligence. Intelligence is IQ, which is intelligence quota. What is an intelligence? The mental quality that allows you to learn from experience, solve problems, and use your knowledge to adapt to new situations. Intelligence tests use numerical scores to measure aptitudes for those tasks, compare them to how well others do. One theory is there's one general intelligence, Spearman, okay? Which I don't believe people really believe. Evidence comes from the fact that who score well on one test can also tend to score well on other tests. Verbal and math tests relative to other people, you tend to have equal both skills. Factor underlying these consistent abilities is called the G factor, which is the general intelligence. Also supports theories for multiple intelligence. There's 3 type intelligence, which is analytical, intelligence for academic abilities, creative intelligence for creative developing novels or art, and practical for solving problems. How to get a bookcase up a scurvy ladder. Curvy, not scurvy. And then IQ measures our analytical intelligence. And it's basically or a it's scored on the average of person score of 100 depending whether you relation to 100. A standard deviation of 15. Those who have a high IQ creatively and practically do not tend to have better marriages, achieved greater physical and mental well-being. Another psychology proposed emotional intelligence, perceived as understanding, managing, use emotion interaction with others. Another way to look at intelligence is two main categories: fluid and crystallized intelligence. Okay. Fluid intelligence is the ability to reason quickly and abstract, such as when solving novel logic problems. Crystallized intelligence refers to accumulated knowledge and verbal skills. Fluid intelligence tends to decrease as we move into older adulthood, while crystallized increases or stays the same. So fluid, if we think about it, is the movement of ideas, because fluids like to move and they're never just steady. While crystallized is like a crystallized crystal. The atoms are locked in, so they don't really alter over time. Okay. Alfred Binet, first to develop an intelligence test, wasn't intending to. Developed a test in order to establish a child's mental age and measure a child's intelligence development, or how they would do good in school later. It was designed on French children. Louis Terryman is a psychologist of the Stanford University. Modified the test for teenagers and adults, and this is called the Stanford-Binet's intelligence test. Terman noted that Binet's test was not predictive of the U.S. children. Stanford-Binet started being used to measure intelligence of immigrants, which was a huge problem. The test language ability was presently clear. Language barrier. Now intelligence tests are designed to make them more applicable to all cultures. So, the question is it nature or nurture? So, this is an argument saying that our intelligence is through genetics and nature development, natural development or natural selection. Well, nurture is saying that our environment influences how we develop our intelligence/experiences. So, they studied hereditary by looking at correlation studies of twins who grew up in different homes, identical twins raised together, and fraternal twins raised together. So they used a twin study here to compare different results, because identical twins should have the same DNA sequence. Fraternal twins should have different, and so on. So what we know is three groups strongly correlated between IQ. Identical twins raised in the same home, raised apart not as a high correlation. Fraternal twins raised apart showed lower correlation, suggesting a genetic component. So they're saying, so the conclusion from the study was that nature and nurture both contribute intelligence, which is obviously the belief of today, that both nature and nurture tend to contribute to intelligence. That's not just one's genetics, but someone else's environment. For example, two doctors that have really high intelligence IQs can have a kid, but that kid gets in a lot of troubles, gets into the wrong crowd, and that interrupts like his willingness to learn and go to school. So that will decrease his intelligence. I'm not saying his other types of intelligence, but most likely his academic intelligence if he doesn't go to school. Alright, so let's look at a fixed mindset. Actually, let's read this because I accidentally skipped over it. No recipe for structuring environment to make a genius, even though we know environments would impair intelligence. When children are deprived of interaction with people or language, intelligence is impaired. So this is a direct correlation. Exposure is better than no exposure, but a ton of exposure doesn't lead to a genius. So it's basically the more interactions that person has, the more likely to develop more intelligence. Okay. Attitude towards intelligence is important, perhaps. Some people have a fixed mindset, which they don't alter their way of thinking, or you can have a growth mindset where they can say that their intelligence is changed. Those with a growth mindset can accomplish more in careers. What I had to learn from my physics class, that we had a growth mindset. Galton's idea of a hereditary genius. So Galton was a cousin of Darwin, and he believed that humans' ability is hereditary. Burdet's idea of mental age is how a child at a specific age performed intelligence compared to the average of that physical age in years. Convergence intelligence was proposed by Guilford to describe an IQ test, test for multiple different forms of intelligence such as puzzle, vocabulary words, and arithmetics. So, some theories of intelligence. So, there's many theories on what intelligence is and how it is defined. People debate, is there one intelligence or multiple intelligence? So, theories of intelligence is stage, which is Spearman, Thorne, Gardner, and Sternberg. So, in order from general to multi-mental abilities. So, a theory of general intelligence is Spearman. Okay? He theorizes that we use only one general intelligence for all our cluster of abilities. And the G factor predicts our intelligence in multiple academic areas. Its strength and evidence. Theory highly supported by research. Those who score high on one area tend to score high in other areas. Scoring high in verbal intelligence correlates with high special reasoning. Oh, what happened? Okay. The problems with the general intelligence theory is it's controversial. Can one factor explain all the diverse human abilities? Maybe, but I don't know. Theory of primary mental abilities. This theorist is Turnstone. His summary is there's 7 factors of intelligence. Word fluency, verbal comprehension, spatial reasoning, perceptual speed, numerical ability, inductive reasoning, and memory. Okay? The strengths is it breakdown seems intuitive, if I know how to speak today. Possible to have high inductive skills while having high verbal comprehension. The problem is, how can we score very together statistically, limited in which considers to be intelligent. Theory of multiple intelligence. This is the one that I learned in child psychology, where it says there's 7 to 9 intelligence, and that they tend to be based on logical, math, verbal linguistics, spatial, body kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, music, naturalistic, and existential intelligence. Strength is you have different strengths is independent, intelligence more than just book smarts. Probably no way to test this theory. Intelligence versus talent and abilities. For the triarchal theory of intelligence, this is a theory by Robert Sternberg where there's 3 independent intelligence, analytical, creativity, and practical. So we talked about this one earlier. Strengths and evidence is reliable, easy to study by research. Problem. Research shows that score on all intelligence vary together. Are these three sides of the same coin? Research suggests there's only one general intelligence. Does the word intelligent even hold meaning? Everything doesn't need to be intelligent. Maybe intelligence doesn't hold any meaning. It doesn't matter if musicians are labeled as having high musical ability or high musical intelligence. It's still wonderful to listen to. Perhaps there is one general underlying intelligence, just like one general athleticism, but varying parts. Same can be true of intelligence. So, aging and cognitive abilities. When cognitive declines as you age, such as recall, episodic memory, processing speed, and divided attention. So, when you get older, you have issues recalling previous memories. You have issues with remembering specific times of memories. You're slower at thinking, and then you could tend to have a more divided attention rather than having just a specific focus. That's stable with aging is implicit memory of different procedurals like cutting, food, cooking dinner, and then recognition memory of recognizing different people that you met. Cognitive improvements is the somatic memory, which improves until 60, which is verbal skills, crystallized intelligence that we talked about earlier, which develops from knowledge and experience, and emotional reasoning. Language. Okay. So language is divided into many subfunctions. How do your brain speaks and understands language? So 90% of people say the left hemisphere is the dominant hemisphere, which contains the two main areas for speech comprehension, which is the Broca area and the Wernicke area. The Broca area is the ability to speak and express language. Wernicke area is the temporal of understanding and comprehending what someone's saying to you. Aphasia is the disorder that involves language. When Broca is damaged, people have trouble producing speech, but they can understand what's going on. Damage to the language production center produces broken and halted speech. Frontal lobe region damage. Wernicke aphasia is having issues with producing comprehensive sentences to someone's statement. They don't make sense when they're talking to you. People with Wernicke aphasia can produce many words. They can speak but use grammatically incorrectly questions. It's word salad, lacking meaning at productive speech. Bronica aphasia and Wernicke aphasia are the most common forms. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The Broca area is whole greater sum parts. Well, the Wernicke comprehension is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The sum is whole greater and the parts are the parts of the whole of the sum. Got it. Global aphasia is both the Broca and the Wernicke are damaged. Acronym global affects language. Okay? Or you could think global means both. Two areas Wernicke are connected by a bundle of nerves and are connected by a bundle of fibers called the cruciate fascioles, also found in deaf people who know sign language. Not specific to spoken language, but brain adapts to whatever modulator is needed for communication. When this is damaged, conduction aphasia, associative aphasia, is the ability to conduct between listening and speaking is disrupted. Makes it difficult for people with this to repeat things even when they understand what is being said. Associated with damage to the cruciate fascius. Lots of other types of communication which have their own equivalents of aphasia. Agraphia is the inability to write. Anomia is the inability to name things. So anonymy, if you think about anonymy from like, what is that one big entertainment? I don't know, but it's like different anonymies are different test subjects that weren't named or whatever in this like entertainment YouTube show. So if you think anonymy is something you can't be named, graphia has graph in it, so it means you can't write. So I think of that like graphite. Language is an example of a big task and broken into small tasks. Spreads into other parts of the brain. Good thing, because if you have localized brain damage, you won't completely lose everything. And it does this by recreating different connections through neural synthetic plasticity. So it remolds the brain when there's damage to it. Some original parts can sometimes recover, while others may have a degree of fluency. With perfectly functioning hemispheres, you might have trouble naming objects. This can occur when the connection between the hemispheres is severed, such as corpus callosum, which is that thick band in the center of the two hemispheres. That's called a split brain patient. Patient with two parts of the brain that are not connected. This used to be done for treatment for seizures, but the side effect was with language. Brain has contralateral organization. Left visual field is the right, and vice versa. You see an object that gets sent to your left, it's sent to your right hemisphere. You won't be able to name it because the right hemisphere can't communicate with the left if you have a split brain patient. However, if the object was in your right, and you would be able to process on your left. So, this is just showing dominant versus non-dominant brains, where the left brain is the dominant side and it has logical, rationality, analytic, objective, while the right is more with random, holistic, and creativity. So what is prosody? Prosody is located on the right hemisphere, concerned with large units of speech like syllables. Contributes to linguistic functions such as intonation, tone, stress, and rhythm. So it's basically looking at different grammar components, such as irony or sarcasm, emphasis, contrast, focus, that may not be encoded for grammar or vocabulary. Theories of language and cognition. Does having different words for color mean that you think about color differently? There's a country in New Guinea that has two words for color, mola meaning dark and mili meaning light, while the US has a lot of words for colors. Behaviorists and empiricists believe language is just a conditioned behavior. So behaviorists think it's like operant conditioning, classical conditioning, which will be talked about later, while nativists believe its rational language must be innate. Materialists look at what happens in the brain when people think. Some languages only have two words for color, but does that mean we think about color differently? Great language debate. Not sure which one is correct. Linguistic universal theory states that there are characteristics that remain consistent across language. Universal thought determine language completely. So universal thinks thought determines language completely. Your thought dictates language. So a universalist believes that a human cognition shapes language, and language is created from a set of universal semantic distinctions. What did Piaget say? Piaget came up with that cognitive development in children. He believed once children were able to think a certain way, they developed a language to describe those thoughts. And influence built it. Language influence is influenced by cognitive development, which makes sense because he has those 4 stages that we started off today with. Example, when children develop object permanence, they start to develop words like gone and missing. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Although the use of language being in the sensory motor stage, we gotta believe that the world of a child in the stage is understood through sensation and action. During the pre-operational according to Piaget, the world is understood mainly through the use of language and mental imagery. Child in concrete develops categories. A person in the scientific reasoning. So the formal stage, they're using scientific reasoning and abstract relationships. Okay. Viscott's language and thought are both independent but converge through divergence. Oh my god, I don't know how to read today, but converge through development. Eventually, they learn the same thing as socialization. Okay? Socialization, believe children develop language through social interactions if adults who already knew the language. Through the interactions, they learn to connect through thoughts and language. Linguistic determination, language has an influence on thought. They called it the weak and strong hypothesis. The weak linguistic determination is language influences thought. It makes it easier that more common for us to think in certain ways based on how our language is structured. Linguistic relativism, there are differences in languages between cultures. For example, the girl pushes the boy. If you imagine the statement with a girl on the left, your native language probably reads from left to right. If you drew it with the girl on the right, your native language probably reads right to left, like Hebrew. Interesting. Strong linguistic determinism, aka Safford-Whorfian hypothesis. Language determines thought completely. People understand the world through language, and language in turn shapes how we experience the world. Native calls like Hopi without grammatic tense in language, they couldn't think about time in the same way. So Whorfian asserts that cognitive perception are determined by language one speaks. So the Whorfian theory says that language completely determines how we think. So Whorfian looks like wolf, and wolves howl based on thinking about the mood. I don't know if that'll help. Maybe. Whorfian looks like a wolf, so when the wolf is howling, it's thinking about the moon. There we go. Theories of language development: nativist, learning, and interactionist. Language development is very complex. Neural networks theory states that there are innate language mechanisms that can be activated by experience. The nativist perspective is that children are born with the ability to learn language, associated with Noam Chomsky. Thought humans have the language acquisition device that allowed them to learn language. Idea is that this ability exists. All languages share universal grammar, so LAD enables children to pick up, understand, pick up things, and organize them into a language. Of a critical period, also called the sensitive period, thought to be from birth to age 8 to 9. The period of childhood the child is most able to learn the language. However, that it becomes harder because LAD only operates in that of a critical period. Once you start using it, LAD starts specializing for your language and able to detect others. Critical period is the sensitive period. So if you take in neuroscience, we talked about critical period in the perspective of developing song for specific birds. So, the point in early development that can have a significant influence on physiological behavioral functioning. So I learned this in neuroscience that critical period is basically a development period where it's necessary for them to have specific interactions to develop that behavior. Alright, investigates transformational grammar, which refers to the different Ways that words can be arranged to convey the same. Language is an innate ability. So, the learning behaviorist theory. Whenever I hear behaviorist, just think of operant conditioning, classical conditioning, because it tends to be associated with those. Children are born with anything; they only acquire language through operant conditioning. See? Children learn to say mama because every time they say that, mama reinforces child. So you smile at them. It doesn't explain how they produce words they never heard before or unique sentences. Associated with Skinner, because Skinner did operant conditioning. Language is learned. Interactionist approach is the social interaction approach, saying that biological and social factors have to influence how a person develops language. Children's desire to communicate with others, such as adults in their life, makes them motivated to learn language. So associated with Vygotsky, and his general timeline for language acquisition is 9 to 12 months is babbling, 12 to 18 is one word, 18 to 20 is explosion of language and combining words, 2 to 3 is longer sentences, and 5 years is language rules largely mastered. So, language components is the lexicon. It's a set of vocab items, entire set of morphemes in a language. Sorry, I was dying from my allergies today. So, example, American Sign Language is a total combination of hand movements, location, facial expression, and body language that helps form meaningful words. So, lexical access refers to identifying a word and connecting it to a meaning, which has been stored in a long-term memory. All kids babble. There's 5 components. 5 components are phonology, which is the actual sound of the language. So, like, if you think about phonology, think of like a phone, and it's the sound of a phone ringing. That's how I remember it. For phononyms, it's the smallest unit of sound. In American Sign Language, it's analogous to the sound of spoken. They're class of phononyms, small units. Oh, they had the same acronym, phone equals sound. Morphology refers to the structure of the word. Many words are composed of multiple building blocks called morphemes, which is meaning of the word, a grammatic system. Sematics are associated with meaning of the word, so like that semantic night word that we were talking about earlier. Syntax is how words are put together in sentences. Syntax refers to the way that words are placed together to form language. Pragmatics dependence on language are context of pre-existing knowledge. So pragmatics think pre-existing knowledge or problem solving using pre-existing knowledge. And then I think syntax is sentence structure. Alright, we're going to enter emotion now. Emotion is the limbic system, and it's just an overall diagram defining everything. The limbic system is a set of structures in the brain, and many structures play an important role in regulating emotions. Experts can't agree which structures make up the entire limbic system. They're responsible for storing and retrieval memories, especially ones tied to emotion. Some structures of the limbic system is hippo wearing a hat, which is hypothalamus, amygdala, thalamus, and hippocampus. Excuse me. So thalamus is the sensory relay station, which integrates all the different senses and different information coming into the brain and sends it to the correct location. So, example, pain goes through the thalamus. Pain signal goes through the thalamus and goes to the somatosensory cortex. The amygdala is the aggression center or the fear center, And it stimulates when there's anger or violence or fear and anxiety. If you destroy it, it causes the Coover-Bucy syndrome, which is a bilateral destruction of the mate can result in hyperorality, to put things in the mouth, hypersexuality, or disinhibited behavior. These are all drunken behaviors. Damaged amygdala. Patients given benzos acts like alk. Those who have anxiety, whom are given benzos, and you see these behaviors. Hippocampus is a key role in forming memories. Converts short-term memories into long-term memories. If destroyed, you can't produce new memories, long-term memories. So you have anterograde amnesia. Hypothalamus is our basic homeostasis structure in our brain, and it regulates many different components like the auto nervous system. Hunger, sleep, thirst, sex, example. Emotions of the cerebral hemisphere prefrontal cortex. So roles of the cerebral cortex in emotion. Cerebral cortex can be divided in many ways. One way is it's divided into terms of the hemisphere, left and right. Positive emotions evoke more activity on the left side. Right-handed people have more on the positive emotions evoke on the left side because the left side is the dominant side of the brain. Evidence. Videos of positive emotions in the left side increase activity EEG. Evidence with children, little kids play in a group. More social kids have more activity on the left hemisphere. More positive on the left. Since I'm left-handed, I have positive emotions from my left side of my brain. Negative emotions are evoked on the right side. Videos of negative emotions, right hemisphere increase activity. More timid. Dividing into function divisions focus on prefrontal cortex. Responsible for many high-order functions, everything that distinguishes humans, executive control. So prefrontal cortex is just our decision making. I remember this about alcohol that we talked about earlier, that if we drink alcohol, it inhibits our decision making and doesn't suppress our inhibitions. Undergoes most development from birth. Helps manage how you behave in social. Phineas Gage had an iron rod penetrate through his prefrontal and after it's rude and rough. The autonomic nervous system and physiological markers of emotion. So physiological changes occur which are undergo the control of the autonomic nervous system. It has two branches, synthetic and parasympathetic. Different actions in your body. Synthetic result due to fear or stress. Pupils dilate, decrease in salivation, increased respiration, increased heart rate, increased glucose. So anything dealing with running or exercise is tended to be increased, which decrease digestion. Parasympathetic is rest and digest, so things relating to resting. Because if you think about it, our pupils dilated when we first talked about it earlier, that we want to look at things more far away to make sure there's no specific threats. They can constrict when we're resting. See up close things, like see food that's close to us. So increased salivation, decreased respiratory because you don't have to run. Increased glucose storage, decrease in adrenaline, and increased digestion. I think I need to blow my nose soon because my allergies are making me want to cry. So, the three components of emotion are universal emotions. Emotions are subjective experiences accompanied by physiological, behavioral, and cognitive changes, all interrelated. Every emotion produces different physiological changes in the body. It changes patterns in brain activity. Example, surprise party when it's your birthday. You get a different physiological component changes. Surprise heart rate may increase, muscle tension, and temperature increase. Your cognitive can vary through different person to person. Their mental assessments can include appraisal of what is happening, thought and expectations about a situation. So, example, someone might enjoy a surprise because of their previous cognition, or someone might hate a surprise party. Behavioral emotions produce different behavioral responses evident from body language or facial expression. Expressions may vary and interpret different culture to culture. Emotions are temporary. Emotions can be positive or negative, can be vary in intensity, can be involuntary, such as falling in love, explosive rage, overwhelmed with excitement. Paul Ekman hypothesized that there are 6 main universal emotions which can be identified by anyone around the world: happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise. These consist with facial expressions across culture and easily recognizable. And the acronym is FADS, which is fear, anger, happiness, disgust, sad, surprise. So happiness represents by raised cheeks, elevated corners of mouth. Sadness represents by uplift inner eyes, downward lips. Surprise, raised eyebrows, eyes open. Fear is eyebrow raised, drawn together, wrinkle in the middle of the forehead. Eyes open, mouth open. Disgust is raised cheeks, wrinkled cheeks, eyebrows are lowered. Anger is penetrating stare, eyelids. This is basic common sense. If you ever see yourself in the mirror, you can determine what these emotions are. Why are emotions universally recognizable? Darwin hypothesized the ability to understand and experience emotion is an innate ability that allows them to act in a way that gave them a better chance to survive. Emotions have an adaptive value and emotions are innate. Newborn babies react the same way as they are grown up. Theories of emotion. Emotions have 3 components: cognitive, physiological, and behavioral. We talked about earlier. The 3 components is physiological arousal, how our body reacts to emotions; expressive display, how we express; and subjective experience of how we feel about them. There's 4 different theories of emotion, which I'm still kind of iffy on. So, the James Lange theory experiences emotion due to perception of physiological response. So, the James Lange is an event occurs, a physiological response occurs from that event, and then you interpret that event to produce an emotion. So, if you think about it, James Lange has L in its name, so it recognizes it late. So you have to recognize a physiological response first because it's late. Cannon-Bard's theory disagreed with James Lange and found flaws in the idea. James Lange thought that an event occurred and it promoted both a physiological response and an emotional response at the same time. That's the specific details we need to know for these 2. But here's just extra examples. So, Cannon-Bard says that they're occurring at the same time, while James Lange said the motion occurs after we interpret what's the event because it's late. Singer and Singer is a 2-factor theory, and it's a physiological cognitive response stemmed from forming an emotion. If we become physiologically aroused, we don't feel a specific emotion until we're able to label it. So this theory is saying that we have an event, that we have a physiological response, and then we have to identify the reason for that response to produce the emotion. Okay, event, physiological response, identified reason, consciously that it promotes the emotion. This is a theory that wasn't in my book, so I actually need to read through this. Lazarus' theory is experience of emotion depends on how situated is cognitively appraised. If we label emotion as good, it is positive. If we label emotion as bad, it's negative. How we label event is based on our cultural differences. Event is the same as depending on the label. It produces two very different emotions. Example, activity of jumping off a plane is terrifying for someone that terrifying but exhilarating for someone that's depending on the label. 2. A man who is allergic to bees encounters a bee. Essentially, the man interprets that his allergy to bees makes his encounter threatening. His heart rate increases. Or another event is your event, you're holding a cap, labeling stage, and praising cognitive, happiness, emotion, physical. So, the Lazarus theory is you label an event based on your experience, and you produce an emotion and a physiological appraisal if that's positive or negative about the event. You can remember, Lays. What the fuck was that? How do I undo that? Let's try that again. Event. There you go. And then we can remember Lazarus is labeled to lead to emotions and physiological responses. So event, appraisal. If you say that's a good or negative event, and it promotes these emotions. So recap, James Lane is you'll have the physical response because the emotion of interpretation later. Canon is you have them at the same time. So like canon is combo of both of them at the same time. Slatter and Singer is physiological and then response. So you have to interpret it after having a cognitive response to have emotion. Lazarus is a label. So the limbic stress. Limbic is involved in emotion. The ability. Oh my god. Don't know how to read today. Sorry, everyone. Limbic system is involved in emotion. The amygdala can conduct our emotional experience, communicate with the hypothalamus and prefrontal cortex. The amygdala plays a key role in fear and aggression. Emotions associated with the memories are encoded in the hippocampus. Prefrontal cortex involved in decision-making and executive functions. People perform best when they're moderately aroused. The Yerkes-Dodson saw. The bell-shaped. So this is going to be related to social facilitation later, that if their arousal is too high, they'll start performing terribly. But if their arousal is too low, they'll start performing worse. But if it's in the middle, they'll perform excellent. Or not excellent, but pretty good. Alright. We'll continue with stress, I believe. Yeah, let's just work our way through stress. And then I'll call it for now. Because it's only 6 pages. So, what is stress? Okay. So, stress is the process by which we appraise and cope with the environmental threats and challenges. It covers both a stressor and a stress reaction. A stressor is an event that causes a stress response. A stress reaction is a physical and emotional response. So Richard Lazarus, that we talked about earlier, is using the appraisal theory of stress. There's 2 stages, the primary appraisal and secondary appraisal, which I have talked about in health psychology. Primary appraisal is assessing stress in a present situation. I see if it's irrelevant, benign, positive, or stressful and negative. If it's negative, then we move to the second appraisal. If it's irrelevant, I see it's not stressful, then we continue on. If it's benign or slash positive, like the dinosaur takes out the dog, the rabbit's the enemy. If it's stressful and negative, the stressor is actually threatening, then we run. Secondary appraisal is the evaluation of the individual's ability to cope with the stressor. What is the individual's ability to deal with the stressor? Appraisal of harm, threat, and challenge. It's coping mechanism. Humans have a stress reaction that anticipates stressors. Makes the whole process a bit more interesting and complicated. So there's 4 main types of stressors. Significant life changes, change in your personal life, death of loved one, marriage, loss of job, having children. Catastrophic events like a hurricane, tornado. Daily hassles. Seems minor events, hassle of the daily life, like long store lines for getting car keys. Those are just smaller ones. Having to pay a bill, write an email, aggravating roommates. And ambient stresses, global stresses that are integrated into the environment, perceived but hard to control, can negatively impact us without us being aware of it. Stuff we just put up with our lives, pollution, noise, crowding. So ambient means environment, so ambient stressors are just environment stressors. So, responding to stress, Walter Kent spent some of his career expanding on our knowledge of homeostasis, our tendency for a body to respond to the environment and keep it in homeostasis. He was interested in the homeostatic response of animals to stress, threats, and damages. Cannon was interested in the homeostatic response to stress. He turned our response for the fight or flight response. Interesting. That the cannon is the combo. Interesting, okay. Makes sense why he has the fight or flight system. So the fight or flight is the sympathetic nervous system and the endocrine response. The sympathetic system is the fight or flight, which triggers the get out of danger mode, which increases all the different components that we talked about earlier, dealing with exercise to get out of harm's way. So, endocrine response is the adrenal glands release catecholamines, epinephrine, adrenaline, norepinephrine, catecholamines are tyrosine derivatives developed by the ectoderm. The adrenal cortex releases glucocorticoid, because C and C. Steroid hormone redistributes glucose energy in body and suppresses immune system. Developed by endoderm. Plays a role in developing muscles and bones. We also have a tend and befriend response. Sometimes better response to stress is having a support system. Oxytocin is important for this, peer bonding and moderate distress. Oxytocin has strong links to estrogen, a major sex hormone in women, so why this response is stronger in women. So we have distinct stages of stress under the general adaptation syndrome. There's 3 phases that Seil mentioned. There's an alarm phase, which a stress reaction kicks in. Okay? Which our heart races, resources mobilized, ready to fight. Then we have a resistance phase. This depends on fleeing, huddling, temperature, breathing rate, body, and the exhaustion phase. If we can't recover, our body starts is become depleted and our tissues become damaged, and our immunity is susceptible to disease. Some physical effects of stress. Chronic stress can have serious negative effects on the body. Damaging effect of stress is on our heart, increase blood pressure, blood volume, can lead to hypertension, vascular disease, get blood, coronary artery disease. Damage affect our stress on metabolism, can remove different receptors for insulin and glucagon. Damage effects on reproduction. Reproduction is a huge energy expense in women, so this gets a shutdown during stress response. In women, FSH and LH and then estrogen can be inhibited while reduced reproductive abilities. Bodies have reduced testosterone as well, but precise levels of testosterone are not required. Impotent or erectile dysfunction can also occur from stress. General effects of stress on our immune function divides an innate and an adaptive, causes inflammation. Acute stress can lead to overuse of the immune system, can attack our own body. Chronic stress stops activation of the immune system response and suppresses you. Doesn't make you sick, but makes you more susceptible. Studies: 40% of slower healing rates for puncture wounds when you're stressed. Increasing susceptibility to virus to stressful individuals. 20% increase the development of a cold. Stress can have damaging effects. Behavioral effects, stress management. Okay. Some behavioral effects of stress is the 2 areas in the brain with the most glucocorticoid receptors are the hippocampus and frontal cortex. Hippocampus is learning and memory. Frontal cortex is responsible for impulse control. Reduce the atrophy in these areas with stress. One major emotional response to stress is depression. Problem is anhedonia, inability experience. Biological backing. Anterior cingulate stops responding to serotonin. Learned helplessness is you learn from having a control ripped out of your hands that you don't have control. So you lose the ability to identify coping mechanisms because taking control out of our outcome of our life. Cycle continues downward to major depression. Other emotional behaviors that affect stress. Stress has 3 S's, which correspond to 3 A's. Anger is another response to anxiety or addiction. So anger is testing stress, increased vulnerability, and anger. You can either be type A or type B. Type A is usually angered individuals, aggressive, competitive. Type B is easygoing. Anxiety centers on the amygdala. Amygdala fears and phobias. Fits in perfectly with response to fear. Addiction, which searches for the coping mechanisms that are good options and bad options. Impairment of the frontal cortex. So, stress management. Coping with stress. Perceived control. Many studies show lack of control associated with higher stress. Tends to be related to low social income. Shown by baboons had a social hierarchy similar to humans. Primates at the bottom of the barrel socially had more stress. Suggestion looks for areas of life where you can take a little bit out of control. Optimism is humor, and optimism is linked to decreased stress. Nurture optimistic look. Social support, one of the best coping mechanisms of stress, allows us to confide in 3 painful, difficult feelings, allow us to understand we are not alone. Which we'll talk more about social psychology later. One of the best coping mechanisms of stress allows us to confide in 3 painful, difficult feelings. Managing stress, exercise. Regular exercise requires control. Decreases of risk of cardiovascular. Meditation helps lowers our heart rate. Religious belief creates healthier lifestyle. Cognitive flexibility, perspective changes a huge in our perception of what is stressing us out. Good way to work with a counselor. Coping is the extent of ability to solve personal and interpersonal problems, seeking to master, minimize, or tolerate stress or conflict. Effectiveness of coping is dependent on the type of stress and conflict. The term coping generally refers to adaptive constructive strategies. Some strategies are maladaptive. Maladaptive strategies are described in non-coping. Further, the term coping generally refers to reactive coping. Kind of confusing, this whole paragraph. Coping responses are partly controlled by personality. Makes sense. So coping is expanding consciousness to solve personal and interpersonal problems. So you need to master and minimize the tolerance. So let's do adaptive coping mechanisms. Or positive coping techniques. Constructive. One positive coping anticipation is known as proactive coping. Anticipation is which one reduces stress by anticipating that it's likely going to happen. So you anticipate like a tornado coming. To others is social coping, social support for others, and meaningful focus coping, in which a person concentrates on deriving means from stressful experience. Adequate nutrition, exercise, sleep help contribute to stress management as well as physical fitness. One of the most positive methods people use to cope with painful situations is humor. Feelings to the full, but you master them by turning them into pleasure and fun. When dealing with stress, it's important to deal with your physical, mental, and social well-being. One should maintain one's health and learn to relax if one's under stress. Mentally, it's important to think positive thoughts, value oneself, demonstrate good time management, plan and think ahead, and express emotions. Socially, one should communicate with people and seek new activities. By following these strategies, one will have easier time. We have the maladaptive or negative coping techniques. Maladaptive improve functioning. Maladaptive reduce symptoms while maintaining and strengthening disorder. Maladaptive is dissociation, sensitization, safety behaviors, anxious avoidance, and escape. These coping strategies interfere with a person's ability to unlearn or break apart the pairs associated between a situation. Associated anxieties. Maladaptive strategies are also well known to cause a disorder. So, dissociation is the ability of the mind to separate and compartmentalize thoughts, memories, and emotions. It's often associated with PTSD. Sensitization is when a person seeks to learn about, rehearse, and anticipate fearful events. Seek to learn about, rehearse, or participate fearful and prevent them from those events. Safety research shown individuals with anxiety starts come to rely on something or someone as a coping. Anxious avoidance is when a person avoids anxiety to provoke situation by all means. So they'll just avoid going to like a park or anything. Escape is closely related to avoidance. This technique is demonstrated by people who experience panic attacks or have phobias. They want to flee the situation. Okay. There's types of maladaptive mechanisms. Overcompensation. Aggression, hostility. It counteracts through defying, abusing, blaming, attacking, and criticizing others. Dominance, excessive self-assertion, controls others through direct means to accomplish goals. Recognize seeking, status seeking, or reconnaissance through impression, high status, achieve status, attention seeking. Manipulative exploitation, meet own needs through covert manipulation, seduction, dishonesty, or conning. Passive aggressive rebellion, appears overly confident while punishing others. Rebellion coming through procrastination, pouting, backstabbing, lateness. Excessive orderliness, maintains strict order, tight self-control, or high level of predictability through order and planning. Excessive adherence to routed ritual, undue caution. Surrender is compliance dependence, relies on others, gives in to seek affiliation. Passive dependence, submissive clinging, avoid, so you're surrendering to them. Avoidance is social withdrawal, excessive autonomy, copes through social isolation, disconnection, withdrawal. May demonstrate exaggerated focus on independent self-reliance rather than involvement of others. Sometimes retreats with those private activities such as extensive TV watching. Compulsive stimulation seeks excitement or distraction through compulsive shopping, sex, gambling, risk-taking, physical activity, novelty. Addictive self-soothing avoids through addictions following the body such as alcohol, drugs, overeating, excessive, etc. Physiological withdrawal copes through dissociated numbness, denial, fantasy, or other internal forms of psychological escape. For example, coping strategies involve emotional or structural support, self-distraction, denial, substance use, self-blame, behavioral disengagement, use of drug or alcohol. Many people think that meditation not only calms their emotion but also makes us more together in the kind of prayer in which you're trying to achieve inner quietness. Low effort syndrome or low effort coping refers to the coping response of minority groups in an attempt to fit in a dominant culture. Haven't heard that one before. Example, minority students at school may learn to put in a minimal effort as they believe they are being discriminated against by the dominant culture. And we will pick back up with behavior on page 106, basically. But that's a break time for now.